I've been playing a lot of Elementalist in endgame Guild Wars 2 PvE, and the build that I'm having the most fun on is a fresh Air Tempest. It's quite a challenging build, but it has a lot of versatility with the ability to give boons to its allies and to heal a little bit in those situations where you're either split from your team or it's a really high pressure situation where survival is more important than doing damage. So I'm going to go over how I play the Fresh Air Tempest, what the build is, and the playstyle. The gear that you want to use is going to get you to exactly 75% crit chance, because on a power DPS build, which this is, you want to get to 100% crit chance. But when I have Fury, which is when I'm fully buffed, I'll get that extra 25% chance. So with full Ascended Armor, you'll get to 75% crit chance if you have the Signet of Fire, which is going to give you some precision, the Accuracy Sigil, and then you want an Assassin's Accessory and an Assassin's Ring, and that will get you to 75% crit chance. Everything else is Berserkers. I've got these Scholar Runes, and then a Force Sigil on my Scepter and Warhorn, as well as that Accuracy Sigil. Also, you can buy a Jade Bot tier 10 on the trading post. If you can afford like 30 gold, this will give you an extra 235 vitality, which to an Elementalist is like another 15% health, which can really help keep you out of the down state. Because this is a glass cannon build, most of your traits are just going to give you more damage, but you will get stability on overloading, and this is important because your overloads, on top of giving you a stun break, are very important skills to finish the cast on, because you get an extra effect if you finish it. So you really want to make sure that you don't get interrupted, and this stability helps to prevent that. In Fire Attunement, we've got the Wildfire and the Fire Overload. These are fire fields, and when these fire fields hit enemies, they will give you stacks of persisting flames, which increases your damage dealt. Also, in air, Fresh Air will not only allow you to go into air whenever, because it reduces your Air Attunement recharge, but it will also give you 5 seconds of 250 ferocity, which is a lot, and that means that when you swap into Air Attunement, you're going to be doing a lot of burst right afterwards. And then you've also got Transcendent Tempest, which means you're going to do more damage after completing an overload. So these are your damage modifiers that we're going to want to stack up on our highest damaging abilities to do our burst combo. So start thinking about that when I talk about the rotation later on. Your highest damaging abilities are the Lightning Orb and the Air Overload. The Lightning Orb is interesting because it shoots out projectiles to nearby enemies when it's close to them. So the longer the orb is near them, the more projectiles it will shoot. So positioning this skill is really important. If you're right on top of the mob, then it's going to travel through it faster and therefore do less of those projectiles. And if the mob is moving in a certain direction, you don't want to shoot the orb through it. You want to shoot it in the same direction as the target so that it constantly moves with it and it stays in range longer and does more projectiles. And then you've got the Air Overload. This is a wide cleaving attack. Try to stand in between two targets so that you can hit them both at the same time. But make sure you do not swap out of Air Attunement before it finishes, or you'll cancel it and feel really bad. Also, the Lightning Strike is a no animation, decent damaging ability. Because it doesn't take up an animation, it's really important to constantly use this while using other abilities. So it's not sharing the animation uptime, and therefore you can just constantly keep using it. So from now on, I don't need to say use Lightning Strike, just assume you're always using Lightning Strike whenever you can. Your elite skill, you have a few options. You can go for Rebound, which will prevent fatal damage to allies while this buff is on them. This is really good for fights like Cardinal Sabir, Conjured Amalgamate, or Veil Guardian, where they have these one-shot mechanics, and instead of going down to these mechanics, you'll go really low health, and then you can be healed up to prevent you from wiping. But a lot of situations is not going to be useful, like where you're taking a lot of pressure and you're taking many hits. Rebound will not prevent you from getting killed after you take fatal damage if you're getting hit by multiple hits. So in that situation, it would actually be better to use the Glyph of Elementals while you're in water attunement, because the water elemental heals for a lot. Does 6,000 healing with no healing power on a 15-second cooldown. So you can go for that in higher pressure situations, or you can just use it in fire attunement and just do more damage. So while in the fire attunement, you want to use the Glyph of Elementals, and then the active effect of the Glyph of Elementals is also instant, and because of that, you want to be using that whenever you can. And then you've got some interesting abilities here. You've got the Dragon's Tooth, which creates a delayed attack, which does quite a bit of damage. You've got Phoenix, which will do a projectile that will hit targets that it travels through, and then it will explode and come back to you. You want to aim this behind the target so that it goes through, explodes, and then travels through again. If you aim it too far behind, though, it doesn't explode on the target. So make sure you aim right behind them, and then you'll get the maximum damage on that skill. The Wildfire doesn't look like it does a lot of damage, but it is actually one of the highest damaging abilities you have. But because it is so slow, you need to make sure that you use it on an enemy that isn't going to move in a while. So after you've used those abilities, your Overload Fire should generally be off cooldown, and you want to use this in melee range. It's very short range compared to the Overload Air, but it's very important because it does quite a bit of damage over time, gives you that persisting flame stacks, and it will give you a lot of might, which you can then share to your allies if you use the Heat Sink. The Fire Overload and the Heat Sink right after it will keep your party at 25 stacks of might very easily, and if you're with your team, they'll generally have might, so you don't need to use it, and it does no damage, so it depends on the situation, really. So after you use the Overload Fire, you're going to have a bunch of pulsing damaging out. You're going to have the Wildfire, you're going to have the Overload Fire, then you want to use Firestorm, and then you're going to use your Burst combo. So you've got all these pulsing damages going out, and then you're going to use Dragon's Tooth and Phoenix, and you're going to swap into the Air attunement. So what that does is it makes all of those damaging abilities have the fresh air bonus on them. So you want to make sure that you do this as well with the water skills. So Water 2 does a decent amount of damage. It chills the target. And Water Trident is a projectile that will do more damage to targets that have chill on them. So you always want to do 2 into 3 and then use the Air attunement right before the Trident hits so that you get the fresh air bonus. So let's go over the rotation. First, you're going to start out with the Lightning Orb and the Overload Air. As usual, those are the highest damaging abilities. You're going to swap into Fire. Use the 2, 3, and the 5. And then you're going to use the Glyph of Elementals in Fire if that's off cooldown. And you'll use the active whenever. By then, the Overload Fire is going to be off cooldown. And then we're going to prepare to do our burst, because we've got the Transcendent Tempest going from the Overload Fire. We've got the Persisting Flames from doing Overload Fire as well. We're going to put down some more pulsing damaging effects from the Firestorm, and then we're going to do the Dragon's Tooth into the Phoenix, and we're going to swap into Air Attunement before those land, and then we're going to use either the Lightning Orb if that's off cooldown, or we're going to just go straight into the Lightning Hammer and use the 4 skill while we've got all those damaging effects going on. And by then, you're going to have the Overload Air ready, so you'll want to use the Overload Air. And now if you have the Lightning Hammer, then you're going to drop that and swap into Water, use the 2 and the 3, swap back into Air, and we're going to either use the Lightning Orb if we haven't used that earlier, or we're just going to auto attack with the auto attack from the Air until we get our Overload Air again. We're going to use Overload Air twice, and then by then you'll have your Fire Attunement off cooldown. And when the Fire Attunement is off cooldown, we're going to go back into it and set up another burst. So we're going to do the 2, the 3, the 5, and then we're going to Overload Fire, and now we set up the burst again. So we're going to Firestorm, 2, 3, and then go into Air, Orb, and then go into Lightning Hammer and use the 4. And that's pretty much the basic rotation. But not every situation is a DPS golem. So sometimes you'll need to speed up the rotation so that you do the burst sooner so that you can hit the boss when it's actually vulnerable. Or sometimes you'll have to move away from the boss so you can't be in range to use your fire overload. So you'll use your glyph of storms before you use your fire overload because you want to be optimizing your animation times more so than sticking to the very strict rotation. So reacting to the situation is always going to be better, and to actually get good at that, you need to practice. This is the challenge mode of the Aetherblade Hideout Strike mission. I'm going to be playing as a Fresh Air Tempest in the role of the DPS. So the beginning of this encounter is kind of annoying for DPS players because the boss moves around so much. So what you want to do is you want to predict where the boss is going to move to, or kind of like know where the tank is going to move the boss later on, so that you can put your AoEs and damaging effects that kind of stay in one place in the location that the boss is going to move to, rather than in the location that the boss is currently at and going to move out of. So you can see I use the wildfire in the direction that the boss is moving towards, and that allows me to put all my AoEs down in the same place and land my big burst. So that's something that you really want to pay attention to. Now we've got a split up for the Phantom because we've got all the orange circles, and because of that I'm preparing my next air overload, and I'm going to wait to use my lightning orb before I go into the fire attunement because I know that the mob is probably going to die before I finish my full rotation, and if I go for the full rotation, then I'm not going to use the lightning orb. It's not going to hit the mob at all, and I'll actually do less damage by adhering to the strict rotation. So sometimes you want to shorten that rotation and do the burst sooner, because doing the burst at all is better than doing it and greeting for a bigger burst that won't even hit because the mob dies before I can do it. Another thing is I just use the lightning hammer for CC. You don't want to be afraid to waste your lightning hammer for CC because our entire team cannot do damage while we're waiting to CC the mob. So if I lose a little bit of DPS myself so that everyone can do more DPS sooner, that's actually increasing our DPS. So the boss is out now. I use the lightning orb and the air overload, and now we're going to do our big burst. I actually use the glyph before the overload there, which isn't terrible. You can do that as well, but I would prefer to use the glyph after the overload because you get more time in the fresh air. So the lightning hammer is actually going out here on the second time going into the air attunement, and that's also fine too if you need to do that, because generally you want the lightning hammer to be used after you leave the fire attunement, because then you've got the extra ferocity from wielding the lightning hammer while all those pulsing damaging effects are happening. But if the situation doesn't allow it, then you can just use the lightning hammer afterwards, and you can kind of like get that burst on the second time entering into the air attunement. So now we've got the Phantom again, and we're not going to land our entire burst there, so I don't even bother using the glyph because, as I said, doing the burst sooner is going to be better. And we kind of did the Phoenix right as the mob was dying, so we kind of optimized our damage there. And now we've got to do CC again. So like I said, you want to use the lightning hammer. You can also do the 5 into the 2 because the 5 creates a lightning field, and then doing the 2 is a leap finisher, which is a daze. So yeah, don't be afraid to use that lightning hammer for CC because CC is also very important, not just DPS. Now I'm going to do the burst here. It's a little bit delayed because I dodged. I could have jumped over the shockwave, but I chose to dodge. And now we're going to keep bursting with the water burst. And I'm going to probably dodge that. Yeah, that attack, you can see one of my teammates went down. That attack does a lot of damage because it can multi-hit you. And as an Elementalist, where you're very squishy, it's very likely that you die to that. I don't have any stacks of exposed though, because I'm doing a good job of dodging and jumping over the shockwaves, so maybe I could survive there. Now in this phase, there's really not much I can do. It's just a puzzle, so there's no damage I can do. I could go into the Earth Attunement and increase the duration of the boons we have, or I could precast might stacking, but we've generally got good enough boons in this group, so I chose not to do that here. Now I'm going to precast my lightning orb from back, but I did it too early. I should have waited a little bit longer because it was already passing through the boss before they became vulnerable. So that wasn't the best precasted burst, but it is what it is. And now we're going to do our burst here. We're just doing damage, trying to avoid the mechanics at the same time. And you're going to dodge. While you're doing your overload, it's actually pretty easy to do mechanics because you don't have to be pressing all those abilities. And that's kind of why Tempest is a little bit accessible despite having a more difficult rotation than, you know, other classes, is that while the overloads are happening, you get more time to think about what you're doing. So that's kind of why I like Tempest as well. It's a little bit more or a little bit less spammy than your average Elementalist build, like a Weaver. But now we've got to cleave these two mobs out with the air overload, with the good positioning there. And I'm going to use my full burst here because I just so happen to be in the... Well, actually, it was kind of a weird burst, actually, yeah, here. So it was weird, but I still got the Phoenix and the air attunement swap at the end there, so it still worked out. But now we've got a CC. I don't use the lightning hammer this time because it looks like our team has enough CC. So I'm going to precast my overload air, and I actually... Did I use my lightning orb there? I should have used it because it's going to be a while before it is able to be used again anyways, so I don't want to just wait. Yeah, I did use it, so that was good. And now I'm going to be able to use the lightning orb on the second time that I enter into the water or the air attunement, because I used it to an extent where, you know, it's not going to be off cooldown at the normal rotation time. So now we're going to do our burst, and the boss is going to phase soon, so we're going to do our Phoenix burst and lightning orb one last time, and now it's phasing. This time I do go into the earth attunement and just use the sand squall there. I can use the overload earth as well to give a little bit more protection uptime, because I know that this last phase is the most dangerous phase, so I want to make sure that we're ready for it. So yeah, we don't have alacrity or quickness right now, but extending the boons, yeah, doesn't really do much then because we'll have plenty of those other boons. I use the precasted lightning orb again, and it's still too early that time. So yeah, a bit of a mistake, but it is what it is. Now we just need to finish off the boss. I do use my heat sink there, but I don't think that was necessary. Sometimes you just want to use heat sink because there's no other skill you can use at the time, and you're still waiting for your fire overload, so you might as well just fit that in there. And we're gonna do one final fire burst here. So we're gonna, yeah, I probably shouldn't have used the glyph that early, but since I was thinking about the dodges, I wasn't really prioritizing the most damage. I was prioritizing survival. But now we're gonna finish off the boss, and that's pretty much how you play the Fresh Air Tempest in PvE. If you like this content, then be sure to like the video and subscribe for more. Regardless, enjoy your journey, and I will see you all next time.